Welcome. My name is Herb, and I'm an alcoholic. I'm so very, very pleased to have you here. And we'll start with the serenity prayer, please. God, grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, courage to change the things I can, and wisdom to know the difference. Thanks, Jose, Rainey, and Morgan, who is also co-hosting. Thank you for everybody for your support and welcome to this workshop. It's part of a series, and you heard Rainey talk about several actual series that are taking place. Just to make the distinction, this series, The Path to Freedom, is a series that is going to talk about a step a month, literally attempting to do step 1 in January, step 2 in February, step 3 in March. The exception will be step 4, since it's so, by at least my exposure and experience, so large and demanding. We'll split that into, and then the following after the step 4, we'll take 5, 6, and 7 in order to talk about that, etc. So there's some logic to it, even though it's not eventually a step a month. By the end of this year, we will have had an hour-and-a-half exposure to each of the steps, or a group of steps that make sense, in the form of a presentation. That's what you'll experience today. I'll do probably an hour to an hour and a half of a presentation. At the end of the presentation, which I'm going to discuss step 2, we'll have lots of time for dialogue, participation, Q&A. So it behooves you to have a pen and paper, because there may be things that you are reminded of with a comment and or experience and or some discussion and disagreement that you might want to make. And please record it on your paper, so that when we come to the Q&A, you're clear as to what you want to either say or ask. My intention is to have the Q&A as long as there's a robust conversation relevant to the subject. I'm going to probably max it at an hour, which means that it's going to be longer than the advertised hour and a half. And we ask for a donation. The work that I'm doing and all your registration fee goes directly to the retreat center. They have been closed almost for a year now, no physical meetings, and it's the only source of their income. I've been connected to the retreat center since officially February of 1984. When I got sober, my wife went up there for a day retreat and connected to a group of people that gave her some information about drinking and the problem of drinking and the possibility of recovery, all of which was new information for her and for our family. And that began our journey. My sobriety date is February 21st, 1984. And so this is a very important month, and the retreat center is a very important place to us. It's about a mile from where I live here in Palos Verdes. It's 8 acres, and once it opens up again, hopefully you'll be able to visit a little piece of paradise in Palos Verdes. I would invite you to ask yourself a question. And I don't mean to be confrontive or simplistic, but it's a method that I learned from personal experience in attending either workshops or a retreat. And that is to get very clear as to why I'm here. Why are you here? Ask yourself that question. Why did you take the time to register? Why did you take the time now to attend? What are you hoping for? What do you expect? Think about it for a minute, hold that question, and then write out an answer, whether it's a word or a phrase or a sentence or a paragraph, it doesn't matter. It's the way that you begin to engage your mind and your heart with what we're doing today. Why are you here? What do you expect? What do you hope for? There's no right or wrong answer. There's just your response. And the second question, there's no right or wrong answer. There's just your response. What is the primary source of your suffering? Notice I did not ask, what is your source? What is your suffering? I did not ask what your current suffering is. That's probably fairly obvious. But what isn't obvious is the source of your suffering. What is your current awareness of the source of your suffering? I'm going to put up some PowerPoints while you're doing that. I think I can. Let's see. Yep, there we go. Most of us are in a 12-step program of some kind. Some of you may not be. My work is open to all human beings. It started when I identified that I was an alcoholic. It broadened once I did the steps. And I understood that there are 3 parts to the 12-step program. Trust God, clean house, serve or help other people. And I was focused on doing workshops for alcoholics. Then the workshops expanded to addicts, and then the workshop expanded to Al-Anon, and then the workshops expanded to anybody in a 12-step program. And then over probably by about my 5th year, I opened it up to anybody who wanted to have a spiritual awakening. Well, the foreword to the big book, the first foreword printed in April of 1939, the first preface to the first edition of the big book. In the first paragraph, in the last line, it says, our way of living may have its advantages for all. Our way of living, steps 10, 11, and 12, may have its advantages for all. And he didn't mean all alcoholics. He didn't mean even, because he didn't have the mindset of all addictions. At that point, he only knew about alcohol as an addiction, 1939, April. But he had an intuition which was prophetic, that this methodology of the 12 steps could work for all human beings because it's a human methodology, as it turns out to be. So I've extended now the invitation to the work that I do, especially the workshops, to anybody who wants to have a spiritual awakening. Well, what's that? Chapter 4, which is the chapter I'm going to focus on today, because it's the chapter that talks about step 2, is entitled We Agnostics. Well, that's interesting. What does that mean, agnostic? Bill addresses agnostic at the beginning of that chapter, and he couples it with the word atheist also. They're different words. And agnostic, the word comes from Greek gnosis, the G is silent, Gnosis, which means knowledge. And when you put an A in front of it, it means no knowledge or doubt. And agnostic doubts the existence of God and says it's unknowable. In contrast to an atheist, another Greek word theos, coming from the word Zeus, means God. And when you put an A in front of it, it means not God. In other words, an atheist adamantly believes there is no invisible, immaterial reality. There is not such a thing as spirit and spirituality. An atheist said, no, nothing like that exists. I'm firmly convinced. An agnostic says, hey, I don't really know. I kind of doubt it. And by the way, it's unknowable. Bill says at the very beginning of chapter 4, not a problem. Not a problem. 50% of us are agnostic or atheist. Not a problem. And you'll see why as we go through this unpacking of chapter 4. A good crusty old friend of mine in my early recovery in a meeting had 50 years of sobriety and was just one of those brilliant people, a little crazy, which made it interesting, and very articulate, which made it, you could listen to him. I went to meetings because that person would be in those meetings, because he was interesting. You never knew what he was going to say. It was always a surprise, but it was always deep wisdom. And he said in one meeting, there's only two sides to the program, the 12-step program. There's only two sides. One is the spiritual side, and the other is the outside. That really captures the truth of it. He said it's all spiritual because it's all about a relationship with power, capital P. The entire program is not about addiction. The entire program is not about alcohol. In fact, the big book, and Bill Wilson says a couple different times in the book, alcohol is a symptom, bottles are a symbol. Alcohol is not the problem. Oh, it is a problem. There is no question. Each of us is here because our addiction of some kind, whether it was alcohol or drugs or food, substance addictions, or whether it was some form of process addiction, relationships, gambling, pornography, work, exercise. There's so many ways that addiction can manifest in somebody's life. And of course, the 12-step process was originally conceived to deal effectively with addiction. But not because it addresses alcohol straight on. It doesn't tell us how to stop drinking. The first 9 steps are the program of recovery, and the purpose of that process is the deflation of the ego at depth to establish a relationship, and by establishing a relationship with power. I hope you track that. Steps 1 through 9 is the program of recovery. Steps 10, 11, and 12 is the program of living. Bill makes a huge distinction. Step 1 has 2 parts. The first half is about addiction, any addiction. When I start, I cannot stop, and when I stop, I cannot stay stopped. That's it. Everything else is drama. It's really simple. When I start, I cannot stop. It's not that I won't stop. It's not that I don't know I should stop. It's I can't once I start. I have a biological mandate, my terms. My body chemistry changes in a way that demands more of the addiction, substance, or process. And I have no choice. We become brain dead to the word powerless. It's so relevant to us when we start step 2, because step 1 is the springboard. Dr. Bob was in the Oxford group for 2.5 years before he ever met Bill. Dr. Bob was sitting in the midst of the solution before he ever met Bill. He just didn't know what the problem was. He thought it was a knowledge problem or a power problem, or a choice problem, or a willingness problem, or a moral issue. And it was only when Bill came and talked to him about what he knew about addiction that Dr. Bob got it, that he was powerless over it, and that he needed to apply the tools of the Author Group to find a power legitimately, authentically, that he had never been able to find before, because he didn't have the desperation of hopelessness. There's only two sides to the program: the spiritual side and the outside. This is our way of life. Step 2, this is why we're here today, to talk about what does the big book say about step 2? What is my knowledge and understanding of chapter 4? Step 2 is encompassed in chapter 4. And it's confronting agnosticism or doubt or atheism and that negative rejection of any immaterial reality. Came to believe. See, it's not a light switch event. There's a couple references in chapter 4 to Appendix 2, a spiritual awakening. It's serious. You need to read Appendix 2 in order to understand chapter 4. Appendix 2 is all about spiritual awakening, because that's the promise of the 12th step, having had a spiritual awakening as the result of these steps. I'm quoting, I'm not paraphrasing. That's the promise. That's the purpose. That's the mission statement. That's the value proposition of the entire step process. A spiritual awakening. Well, what is that? If you summarize it, as I do, it's a change in the way we think and feel and behave, and it's done to us, not by us, but not without us. A change. A spiritual experience and a spiritual awakening are identical in outcome, in product. A change. But they're dramatically different, diametrically different in time frame and process. Bill had a spiritual experience, that mountaintop mystical experience, the room filled with light on his 3rd day of hospitalization. On his 2nd day of hospitalization, page 13 in the big book, Ebby shows up, 2nd day of hospitalization, Bill is still detoxing. Abby takes him through the steps of the Author Group, those six steps which are articulated on page 263 in one of the stories in the back of the book. Page 13 in the big book, you can read it. There's summarized there. His 2nd day of hospitalization, December 12th. He was entered into the hospital drunk on December 11th. December 12th, his very first day without a drink. He goes through the steps, all of them. He doesn't do his amends, of course, but he is very, very committed to doing them. That's what it says in the book. And the very next day, his 3rd day of hospitalization, December 13th. He felt as if he'd been lifted to the top of a mountain and the room filled with light. And a huge wind blew through him. And he was aware of and overwhelmed by the sense of the presence of God. Whew! That's what he calls the spiritual experience. And that's how he framed the first 12th step in that first edition of the big book. You could get it, April 1939, first edition, first printing. Step 12, having had a spiritual experience as the result of the steps. And then if you get the second printing from 1941, step 12 was changed. Having had a spiritual awakening as the result of these steps. And there's Appendix 2 for the first time to explain the difference. A change in the way we think and feel and behave, and it's done to us, grace, not by us. We're powerless. but not without us the preconditions of our willingness and action. And it explains the difference. And my metaphor for that difference is the spiritual experience that Bill had, which lasted 20 minutes, at the end of which he knew intuitively that his alcohol problem had been permanently removed and that his life's destiny was to help other people find the power other than himself so that they could deal effectively with their alcohol problem. That was his mental frame of mind at the time. Third day of hospitalization. Well, that's not my experience. Mine is a spiritual awakening. Very slow, gradual. In fact, glacially slow. It took me 43 years to become aware that I had a problem. I entered into a 12-step fellowship, and it took me 4 years to have the grace and invitation to work the steps with somebody who knew what they were doing. It wasn't my sponsor. I've never worked my steps with my sponsor. It's just my experience. It's not my recommendation. My first sponsor I had for 28 years. I worked the steps on my own in that first year. On my own, I finished step 12 on my own, and I had no change, but I didn't know that I didn't have a change. In my fourth and fifth year, I heard a man share. I asked him to help me, and he took me through the steps. I call him a step guide. It took me 12 months to go through the steps. And I had a spiritual awakening by my standards. It was an experience with the allergy doctor's opinion. I blew by steps 2 and 3 because I had the delusion that I know something about spirituality because I was a monk for 7 years, in a monastery for 7 years, studying to be a Catholic priest for 7 years, 7 years of silence. And I didn't know that I didn't know. That didn't prevent me from having a spiritual awakening. I say it because there's a lot of hope in that. You don't have to have an accurate or an authentic relationship with power in order to have a spiritual awakening. You just have to have the willingness and take the actions and do the best you can. And the Spirit works generously. The next time I did the steps was 3 years later. I was 7 years sober. I blew by steps 2 and 3 again. I had a wonderful experience with the obsession, meaning a deep, powerful experience of hopelessness and doom. And my spiritual awakening broadened and deepened without any connection to steps 2 and 3. But at 10 years of sobriety, I was given the grace of meeting a man who asked me some questions that I'll be asking you and giving me a method that I'll be showing you. And I began to figure out that God was necessary and that my concept of God was the very impediment to my relationship. My concept, even at 10 years of sobriety, even having had 2 previous spiritual awakenings, even having all that theology and philosophy in the seminary and in the monastery. At 10 years, I had my very first awareness of the question, is God necessary? And I found out a very dynamic learning process is to ask a question and hold the question and get some information. Once I get some information, I take some action. Once I take some action, I have an experience that asks me some more questions. You'll find in today, and anytime you're exposed to me, I'll be asking you to ask yourself questions as I did the first time. When we first started, I asked you, why are you here? I also asked you, what's your primary source of suffering? This man said to me, the consciousness that created the problem cannot be the consciousness that solves the problem. He was quoting Einstein. I love succinct wisdom like that. It means my mind cannot fix my mind because my mind's the problem. And any solution that my mind comes up with will have built into it, embedded into it, the problem. So he asked me to pray a prayer. It's not an official prayer. It's just words with the intention of having an open mind and an open heart. And I'm asking you to have that intention. I'm inviting you to be willing to have an open mind and an open heart. This man said to me, look at my hands. He said to me, you have a lot of information, Herb, but you have very little transformation. You have a lot of academic knowledge, but it's never been channeled to your feet. You have lots of thoughts about spirituality, but you don't live very authentically spiritual. And I knew that he knew, and I knew that I didn't. And I'm inviting you, maybe not with these words, you're welcome to use them. I suggest out loud with me as I pray. You're welcome to pray it silently. You're welcome not to pray. You're welcome to just have this positive thought that I will, in fact, have an open mind and an open heart, and I will approach this workshop today like a clean whiteboard and allow the spirit, the power of the universe to write on me, to give me knowledge and to give me new experience that I have never been exposed to. That's the point. An open mind and an open heart. To be taken to a place that I've never experienced and in fact I don't even know exists. Does it sound outrageous? Yeah, it does. But it's not. It's a promise of this process. It comes from my experience. Please join me. God, please set aside everything that I think I know about myself, my brokenness, my spiritual path, and you, for an open mind and a new experience with myself, my brokenness, my spiritual path, and especially you. So ask yourself some more questions. Is my life serial suffering? If you're still in your addiction, the answer is inevitable. But if you're not in your addiction, if you've been disengaged from your addiction for a day or a week or a month, what's your problem? Do I really believe my life can change? Bill calls it bondage of self. There's pathetic Herb. Before he came into the program, I thought I was a victim in prison. I didn't even know I had an addiction. When I came in the program, I knew I had an addiction, but it was certainly my wife's fault, my boss's fault, my father's fault. When I did the steps the first time, I began to get free because I understood addiction, a problem of the body and the mind. It took me 2 different journeys through the steps to get that. In the first 4 years of sobriety, I thought the drama made me an alcoholic. Then I did the work and I saw the doctor's opinion and I see that the allergy makes me an alcoholic. Once I start, I cannot stop. 3 years later, I did the work again and I see that the obsession really is the problem. Bill says the body's a problem, but it's just not the problem with addiction. The mind is the problem. Read pages 23 to 43 in the big book. He said, if the body was the problem, just stop. We can stop anytime. We just can't stay stopped. The second criteria of being an addict of any kind is that you can't stay stopped. I address people all the time. They go, no. I stopped for 2 years. I stopped for 5 years. I stopped for 10 years. And I said, yeah, the operative word there is past tense. Stopped. Well, yeah, I stopped for 2 and 5 and 10 years. Well, then you didn't stop. Oh, the space in between just means you had a breather. If you're relapsing at all, you didn't stop. And I don't care whether you stopped for 20 years. If in fact you relapsed, you didn't stop. What's the problem? I'm hopeless. I can't stop because I have a spiritual malady. Bill says that's the problem. Lack of power, he says on page 25. Lack of willpower, that's our problem. He puts it a different way in terms of the step one. He said we have a problem with addiction. The step one, of course, has admitted we were powerless over alcohol. Because as I mentioned in my opening comments, this workshop is open to everybody, especially those with any addiction. It's a percentage of people that have addiction. 1 out of 10 alcoholics, 5 out of 10 impacted by that, and all kinds of other percentages for the other substance and process addictions. But he says that's not the problem. The real problem is the unmanageability, the best kept secret in the rooms. This is the reason that I do work in the workshops and on the steps, and especially about step 2. I do what I don't want to do, and I don't do what I want to do. That's my short version of unmanageability. Bill gives us a longer version. It's very important to understand the spiritual malady behaviorally. What does it look like? Not in my head and not in my heart, in my feet. I am having trouble with personal relationships. These are all listed in the second paragraph on page 52. It's called the bedevilment paragraph because that word is in there. I looked up that word in a dictionary, bedevilment, to be controlled as if by devils. And I don't mean a religious connotation. I mean, like, I'm a puppet on strings. Circumstances and people decide how I feel and how I act. I've created the strings that make me a puppet, but I don't know that I don't know, and I can't see that I don't see until I do. I can't control my emotional nature. I'm putting the words from the big book in that second paragraph in the personal pronoun in present tense. I am a prey to misery and depression. I can't make a living, and in meditation, the words came to me that satisfied me. I had a great job, a career, decent money. But the wee small voice said, but you're never satisfied, Herb, because you're a bottomless pit. You're a black hole. There's not enough money, power, prestige, satisfaction, or pleasure. Is there, Herb? Thank you for sharing. I have a feeling of uselessness. I'm 10 years sober when I'm doing this. I am full of fear. I am unhappy. I've had 2 prior powerful, life-changing spiritual experiences. I can describe them visibly and measurably in terms of my feelings and my thoughts and my behavior. I won't. But here I am at 10 years of sobriety, seeing that I do what I don't want to do, and I do what I don't want to do, and I don't do what I want to do. I can't seem to be of real help to people. And I took that into meditation because, as I mentioned, I studied to be a Catholic priest. That's all about helping people. I didn't share that I studied then a graduate education and training to become a therapist. I didn't become a therapist. But that was all about helping people, at least on the surface of my motivation. Much more corrupt underneath that, as I discovered later on. And now I'm in a 12-step program and I'm sponsoring people, all about helping people. And the wee small voice said, Herb, you don't really want to help people. You want the reputation of helping people. I came across a definition of unmanageability that maybe you can relate to. An addict is quite capable of such feelings as affection, caring, and love. These feelings just do not involve anyone else. And I became, because I was in therapy at the same time, very connected to my narcissism, a personality disorder that cannot be changed by therapy and cannot be modified by medication. At that time, Dr. Berger was my therapist, and he confirmed on a scale of 1 to 10, I was a 7.5. 20 years, he said, we put 10s in prison. He said, 20 years ago, when we began thinking of doing some work together and not having a therapeutic relationship, I asked him, so how bad is it today in your evaluation? He said, on a scale of 1 to 10, a 2.5. He said, your spiritual life and commitment and authenticity is what has diminished the intensity of your personality disorder. I've become more and more and more over time a genuine human being. Do you have a sense of well-being? Do you have a sense of contentment? Are you still in the bondage of your addiction or in the bondage of self? This is really the key here. Bill says the bondage of self is the problem, is unmanageability. Read pages 60 to 62. It's in chapter 5. It's intended to really describe how it works. I use it as part of step 1, unmanageability, pages 60 to 62, because although the bedevilments on page 52 describe the behavior, pages 60 to 62 describe the exact nature of why that behavior is like that. On the top of page 62, Bill says we're selfish and self-centered, and that's the root of our trouble. Notice I've talked about the body having an allergy. I've talked about the mind having an obsession, and now I'm talking about the will. My will, on its own power, will only choose me. I believe that's the nature of unmanageability. I believe that's the nature of the spiritual malady. I believe that's the true nature of the human problem. Is God necessary? All right, so let's get serious here. With you, ask yourself this question. There's going to be 2. These 2 questions were the key in 10 years of sobriety that unlocked the curtains to allow them to part for me to finally understand that I was an agnostic and that my concept of God, even up to that point, having had 2 spiritual awakenings, had not changed my relationship with steps 2 and 3. But these 2 questions did. Ask yourself and then write an answer to, what's your actual belief about God? But you have to hear the question. I didn't ask what you think. I didn't ask what you feel. I didn't ask what you know. I didn't ask what you understand. I didn't ask what the big book said, what the Bible said, what your religion said, what the Quran said, what your parents said, what your sponsor said, what your 12-step fellowship said. I didn't ask any of that. I asked you personally today in a very confrontational way, intended to open your mind and heart. What do you, sitting there today, actually believe personally today? Believe. What do you believe today? Some people will, as they think about it, will answer, I don't really know. Or some people, like me, who had some background and thought they had some training and understanding, I wrote a wonderful 1-page theological treatise. In fact, when I read it to the step guide, he acknowledged that, said I should publish it. And he wasn't kidding. It was really good and well written. So write out yours. You might have some tentative idea, some vague idea, some very specific idea. It may be connected to your religion. It may be connected to your parents. It may be connected to the 12-step. It may be connected to the big book. Doesn't make any difference. It's yours. What do you actually believe today? Please write out an answer. One of my teachers is Richard Rohr, R-O-H-R. He's a Franciscan priest, a prophet, and probably a mystic. He's written many, many books. One of them on the 12-step spirituality. He's not in 12-step, but he's a deeply and authentically spiritual person. He's been exposed to 12-step meetings, a story for a different day. And he wrote his book on breathing underwater. It's worth reading. He doesn't have experience with the 12 steps, but he understands the theology and the practice of the 12 steps. What do you believe about God? Richard said, belief is the acceptance of that for which there is no evidence. Great definition of faith and belief. The acceptance of that for which there is no evidence. And once we accept it, the evidence begins to appear. He's got a way with words. I don't know whether there is a God. Seriously. I made a decision, a formal and conscious decision in 1994, 10 years sober, that I'm going to lead you through. And I've lived that way ever since. So the key question and the second question is, how do you behave in light of what you believe you believe? Again, Richard Rohr. Ask the question in the milieu of prayer and allow the asked but unanswered question to percolate, to bubble, so that you can be taken to a place that you don't even know exists. You can be given some knowledge that you didn't have. You can be given an experience that will be a surprise. I was surprised. I was startled. I went home after reading my first answer. What do I believe? And he gave me that second question. How do you behave? 10 years sober, I went home and I wrote out how I behaved, which was very much in contrast to what I believed. I didn't rely on this power. I didn't pray and meditate every day. I was self-reliant. If I wanted to accomplish something, I got up early, I tried harder, and I stayed up later, exhausting myself with my human effort and never actually being very satisfied with the results. Because it was all about human development, and it was all about my willpower, and it was all about my knowledge and my effectiveness. Even 10 years sober, even having 2 prior spiritual awakenings. Now I'm using the set aside prayer, and I've had the now experience of technicolor bedevilments. I saw unmanageability for the very first time at 10 years of sobriety. I understood the spiritual malady. I understood unmanageability for the very first time. I believe that prepared me for these 2 questions. Because my life at that point was a series of serial suffering due to my doing what I don't want to do and not doing what I want to do. Baffling. I found out that step 2 is a decision about power. On page 45, I go kind of fast, so it's probably not going to be a benefit for you to be looking at your big book, but you're welcome to do that. I have no rules. On page 45, he said, our human resources as marshaled by the will were not sufficient. They failed utterly. Bill is now addressing unmanageability. He's not telling us that. He thinks he's done with step 1. On page 43, he thinks he's done with step 1, from my interpretation now and understanding and experience, he's done with the first half of step one, addiction. The alcoholic at certain times has no effective mental defense against the first drink. That's about the first half of step one, addiction. But what about unmanageability? I believe that's what he's talking about here. Lack of power, he says on page 45, is the dilemma. We had to find a power by which we could live. Notice he doesn't say by which we could get rid of our addiction. He says by which we could live, manage our lives. And it has to be a power greater than ourselves. He doesn't say God. You see, there's a lot of prejudice in 1939. Religious prejudice, spiritual prejudice, prejudice about the word God. And when you really think about it, it's silly. God is not the reality that the symbol represents. God is just a word. God is not God. God is the word we use to represent that reality for which there is no adequate word. The big book says that in different places. I'm not going to try to trace through the chapter 4 and through the book Bill's thesis about step 2. I'm going to share my knowledge and my understanding and my experience, weaving all of that together in a very spontaneous way. Lack of power is our dilemma. Where are we going to find that power? Where and how, he says on page 45. He asks two very powerful questions, and then he leads us into chapter 4 to answer those two questions, where and how. Well, that's exactly what this book is about. Its main object is to enable you to find a power greater than yourself, which will solve your problem. Hello, not addiction. Lack of power is your dilemma, which will solve your problem, lack of power. And that's when this man took me to that page 52 that I took you through in a present tense and the personal pronoun. And then this man asked me to read and highlight and understand, and we went over page 60 to 62. And at the top of page 62, he says, selfishness dash self-centeredness exclamation point. This is the silver bullet of step 2. Because it's telling us the desperation of step 1, unmanageability. We make decisions based on self. Our troubles are of our own making. We must be rid of this selfishness. God makes that possible. He's saying that we're as powerless to get rid of our selfishness as we are over our addiction. But it gets worse. Many of us had moral and philosophical convictions. Moral, the 10 Commandments and codes of ethics. Philosophical, lots of knowledge and human development. None of it worked. We could not live up to them even though we tried. Now, in the same way that he brought addiction to a conclusion on page 43, no effective mental defense, first half of the first step, he brings the second half of the first step, unmanageability, to a conclusion here. It may not have been in his mind structurally this way, but this is the way organically that he has presented it. Unmanageability is in step 1, second half, after the dash. He says here, neither, on page 62, neither could we reduce our self-centeredness much by wishing or trying on our own power. Not only can I not get rid of it, he said earlier, I can't even reduce it much by wishing or trying on my own power. I'm as powerless over my I'm as powerless over my unmanageability as I am over my addiction, having no power at all. And he concludes here, therefore we need to have a power other than ourselves. I'm paraphrasing. He says we had to have God's help, but I'm using the God word as a symbol of the power that doesn't have any adequate name. In chapter 4, Bill takes us through a process. On page 47, it's the beginning of the process. He asks another question. Do I now believe, or am I willing to believe? You see, it's not a black and white question. It's a question with a little bit of a slack, a safety net to it. Page 47, do I now believe? Well, the chapter's to the agnostic, and we're only a page and a half in, and it might be there still is some resistance. No, I'm an agnostic or I'm an atheist. You haven't convinced me in a page and a half yet. So he has a fallback position. Are you willing to believe? Well, okay. What it said on page 30 about step 1 comes to mind. We learned that we had to fully concede to our innermost self that we were alcoholics. This is the first step, conceding to our innermost self that I'm an alcoholic and my life is unmanageable. The delusion that we are like other people or presently maybe has to be smashed. That's not gentle. The delusion, meaning the lie, that I am like normal or ever will be, meaning that someday I will be normal, that thought has to be smashed. I am not, never was, and never will be normal. It's highly likely, if you're on this call and in a 12-step program, that that's true for you. You have never been, nor are you, nor will you ever be normal. You've heard the metaphor of a pickle, I'm assuming. What happens to a cucumber when you put it in a quart of brine? Well, you may not know this, but if you put a cucumber in a quart of brine and leave it there, it becomes a pickle. Well, how long after you take the pickle out of the brine and put it on the windowsill in the sunshine and allow it to dry out, does it restore itself to become a cucumber? Oh, that would be never. Once a pickle, always a pickle. That's good for a sense of humor, but it's also startling in terms of its fact and science. Once an alcoholic, once an addict, always an alcoholic. Bill does give us the consolation of calling us recovered. Look at the title page. How thousands of men and women have recovered. It's past tense. Look at pages 84 and 85. He says we've entered the world of the spirit once we finish the 9th step. We've entered the world of the spirit. We are placed in a position of neutrality. Hear the gift, hear the grace. We are placed in a position of neutrality, meaning we're recovered. The obsession has been removed, and we have a spiritual shield that protects us from the obsession as long as we have an authentic relationship with the spirit. And if in fact the obsession is not available, then we'll not be practicing our disease in engaging in the substance or the process. An allergy is irrelevant. We have a spiritual shield, my terminology. Bill says we're not cured. Not cured of what? In the same section, pages 84 and 85. Not cured of our unmanageability. Not cured of our humanity. We never transcend our humanity. We have a daily reprieve. Daily, ooh. We don't pray and meditate for a week in a row and have reserves so that we can skip a day or a week. That's not how it works. At least that's my interpretation. We have a daily reprieve, contingent on the basis of our spiritual condition. Spiritual meaning relationship, relationship with the Spirit, relationship with power. Do I now believe or am I willing? And Bill calls that the cornerstone. What is it for you? Healthy steps, higher self, human spirit, the psychologists, the Buddhists, some humanists, they have different interpretations of what does it mean, this power in us that is available to us. Or Holy Spirit. The assumption under the big book is theology. Theology is the study of God, a study of the Spirit, a study of the realm of the immaterial. Bill says we're rocketed into the fourth dimension. Well, what's the fourth dimension? If you go to a movie, they give you glasses. On the side of the glasses to see the movie properly, it says 3D. That means three-dimensional. Well, what are the first three dimensions? At least in 1939. Bill had not met or been aware of Einstein's theory of relativity, so he didn't know that Einstein called time the fourth dimension. He didn't know that. He was using it in the more traditional sense. Height, width, and depth. Those are the three dimensions he's referring to. So when he refers to the fourth dimension, he's referring to the dimension of the Spirit, meaning the immaterial. God is merely the symbol of that which cannot be put into words, because that which be put into words is a life force. We, in some traditional sense, call it infinite. But you could take a look at this picture and ask yourself, there's an acorn. At some point, that acorn or an acorn like it was planted and that oak tree grew out of it. That oak tree may be 100 years old. How did that acorn know how to become an oak tree? How did that acorn become a sapling? What is the life force underneath that? Star Wars was brilliant in capturing that word, the force be with you. It's a very mystical movie when you get underneath the poetry of it. Step 2 is a decision about power. My concept. This is, again, the magic of the 12-step process, because it has no dogma, it has no theology, it has nothing that you need to believe. Bill says we're restored to sanity. So much lack of knowledge about that word. You hear such unfortunate things in meetings about the interpretation. It's really simple. Insanity in the big book is the reference to obsession. Bill uses it very clearly in Jim's story, the guy who put a little whiskey in his milk, pages 35 to 37. And on page 37, he gives us the definition of insanity. A lack of proportion, a lack of the ability to think straight. Whatever the precise definition of the word may be, we call this plain insanity. Bill gives us, the big book gives us, a unique definition of insanity. It's not referring to psychiatric or psychological. It's referring to our relationship with our addiction, obsession, a thought that hijacks us. It takes possession of us without our consciousness and without our permission. That's what we mean by powerless, no choice. We've become brain dead to the word powerless. I use the word no choice. When I start, I have no choice. It's a biological mandate. It triggers chemistry in me. And once the chemistry is triggered, there is no hope. If I don't put the alcohol in my system, then I don't trigger the chemistry. I made a decision not to do that. And then I thought I was changing my mind. I wasn't changing my mind at all. I saw over a 30-year period. my mind was being changed by a power other than myself, an obsession, a thought that took possession of me, a thought that is a lie, a delusion. We normally see it in that it'll be different this time. And it was different. Always worse, but I never saw that it was worse, and I never connected the dots. The next story, Fred's story, the accountant has the phrase that I've adopted for myself because it describes my experience, a strange mental blank spot. That's my experience with my mind. I don't trust it. Today, I don't trust my mind. I trust it more than I did before, even more than I did yesterday. I trust it more today because I'm connected to power. Like that dimmer switch, and I lean in gently to the dimmer switch, and the dimmer switch goes up a notch at a time. And I have a relationship with the fourth dimension. I have a relationship with power. I have a relationship with the light. That fourth dimension is the world of spirit, the world of the immaterial. I don't know whether it exists or not. But on page 53, Bill asks us to make a decision. He calls it a faith decision. Look at page 53. When you get a chance, make a note. When we became alcoholics, crushed by a self-imposed crisis, step one, we had to fearlessly face the proposition that either God is everything or God is nothing. God either is or God isn't. What is your choice? There's no fallback position. On page 47, he said willingness was the cornerstone. Willingness is the cornerstone. The stone first placed on the foundation, that foundation of hopelessness, that foundation of doom, that foundation of powerlessness, that foundation of step one, both with regard to my addiction and eventually with regard to my unmanageability. Cornerstone, the first stone placed on the foundation of a spiritual arch through which we walk to a new freedom. He mentions it again for the second time. In step 3, he calls it the keystone, and he doesn't mention it again till the end of the 5th step, page 75. And he says, now we've built the arch and we've walked through the arch to a new freedom. At the end, as part of the promises, on page 75 of step 5. I'm assuming that then the arch building blocks are the building blocks of step 4. Resentment and fear and dishonesty as manifest in our unhealthy sexual behavior. More about that in April and May. But right now he takes us to this page 53 and he says, arrived at this point, we're squarely confronted with the question of faith. Well, confront yourself. Well, what is faith? What is it that you actually believed? You wrote an answer to a question. That first question, what do you believe? And then you hopefully wrote an answer to the second question. How do you behave? How in parallel are those, or how in contrast are those? You believe this, but you behave that way as I did? I behaved as if I was an agnostic, doubting the power of God, doubting the relevance of God, and by my behavior, even doubting the existence. Not in my head and not in my heart. I would have had a really good discussion with you about the history of religion and the history of God. But my feet didn't show it. I saw that faith was a process, connecting the body and the mind and the will. This is the model I used for the first step, as I mentioned a little bit earlier in summary form. This is what I see as the essence of the human being. The two things that make us human are the mind and the will, the ability to reflect, to think, and the ability to decide. What is faith? If you look it up in a dictionary, at least the ones I used, it wasn't very helpful. Faith is belief. I looked up belief. Belief is trust. I looked up trust. Trust is faith. So what I concluded was that faith is belief, is trust, is faith. Well, that was circular and it wasn't very helpful. I hope this analysis, which took me a little while in prayer and meditation at 10 years of sobriety, will be helpful. Faith is not knowledge or certitude. In fact, it's just the opposite. Faith is the evidence, faith is the acceptance with no evidence. There's no feeling necessarily connected to faith. It's not about emotions. Emotions come from adrenal glands. They're biochemical reactions to our perceptions. Do I have faith if I feel the presence of God? Well, what happens when I don't? Or on the other hand, when I even feel the absence or the negativity that there is no God, which I have felt in the past. So faith isn't an emotion either. Well, what's left? Well, what Bill asked us to do is make a choice, make a decision. Faith is a function of the will. I choose. That's what faith is. Faith is a function of the will. And as you saw it come up on the screen, I hope, under mind, my mind says, well, that's a pretty good idea. If I'm hopeless in step one on my own power, and I make a decision that there is a power, well, my mind says it's reasonable. I'll accept that decision, and then it's reasonable to assume that that's my belief system. Faith is my decision. My acceptance is my belief. But nothing happens until, in fact, I take action. And my body acts as if it's true what I made a decision about and accepted as belief. And that's trust. Now I know specifically. My choice is empty. It's thin. It has no substance. It's not material. It's dark. It's invisible. There's no feeling and no certitude attached to my faith decision. It's just a choice, as Bill said. What is your choice? God is or God isn't. That's black and white. Step 2 doesn't have any dogma or theology or belief or rules or word or concept. In fact, the real silver bullet of the whole 12-step methodology is that you get to choose. But once you choose, then your integrity invites you to live as if your choice is based on reality. So ask yourself, here's another question for you. What's your choice? It's a process of coming to believe, like the dimmer switch going up a notch at a time. Is God like a relationship of fish to water, water being God and me being the fish, and I live in God? I don't know that I live in God. I can't see God. I can't feel God. I don't have any reality of the water around me, but if I get out of the water, I'll die because my entire survival depends on me being in water if I'm a fish. It's a good analogy. A little weak because it's representative of God and me. Whereas perhaps this is a better metaphor. Is my relationship like a wave to the ocean? A wave has a time of existence. It rises out. Maybe it's a tidal wave. It lasts for 3 weeks. It's 400 feet high. It has a definite dimension, a definite chronological existence. It comes out of the ocean, so it is not the ocean. It comes out, it is not just the ocean. It's a wave in the ocean. It has its own identity. Eventually, it recedes back into the ocean. The wave is not the ocean, but the wave is not the ocean. Is it true for me? The Christian and Hebrew scripture talk about image and likeness. Bill talks about a transcendent relationship. It's a $100 word. You could look it up. I'm not going to spend any time on it. On page 14, he says, simple but not easy. A price has to be paid. It meant the destruction of self-centeredness. He's talking about unmanageability. We must turn in all things to the Father of light who presides over us all. That's what transcendent means. The circumference. That whatever this God is, it is everything, Bill said on page 53. I'm a human being within that circumference. But he says on page 55, an answer to the question on page 45. Remember the question, where and how are we going to find this power? He says, sometimes we had to search fearlessly, but God is there. Oh, that's how. He's answering the question, how? Search fearlessly. God is as much a fact as we are. We found the great reality, capital G, capital R. Pay attention to the words in chapter 4 that have an initial capital letter. Those are synonyms. Those are alternate words to the word G-O-D, spirit with a capital S. Great reality with a capital G, capital R. The Father of light, capital L. On page 14 that I just quoted. We found a great reality deep down within us. Oh, that's an answer to where. And he says emphatically, in the last analysis, it is only there that God can be found. Now, Bill doesn't do redundant. In an interview, he was asked about steps 6 and 7, character defects, and the other word, I forget what it is right now. And Bill said, no, they're the same. He says, I was taught in the basic English language that we don't use the same word in consecutive sentences. Character defects or shortcomings. Is there a difference? He said, no. In the same way, he avoided redundancy. So when he says something twice, it must be because he has a point to make, that he's giving it a special emphasis. He does it a couple times. I'll point it out over the time on our journey in our series when he does that. In the next paragraph on page 55, he essentially says what he said in the paragraph just above it. We may have cleared the ground a bit if our testimony sweeps away prejudice. Again, confirmation of the validity of the set-aside attitude. Sweep away prejudice, prejudgment, pre-knowledge, feelings, knowledge, and experience that get in the way of the truth. Enables you to think honestly. He's answering it with a different answer here. How do you find God? Think honestly. Encourages you to search diligently. He ramps it up. Up above, he said, search fearlessly. Here he says, search diligently. And then he confirms within yourself again a second time. You can join us on the broad highway. Pay attention, capital B, capital H. On the broad highway. He uses the same poetic metaphor in the promises on page 75. Let me read it just because I brought it up. We feel we are on the broad highway, capital B, capital H, walking hand in hand with the spirit of the universe, capital S, capital U. All different ways of trying to get a phrase that will hook you, that will capture your imagination, that will capture your invitation to your choice of a word. With this attitude, you cannot fail. Well, I'm a big book literalist and fundamentalist. With what attitude? Oh, think honestly, search diligently, search fearlessly. That's the attitude. You cannot fail. The consciousness of your belief is sure to come to you. There's a promise, but here's the condition. Think honestly, search diligently, search fearlessly. The consciousness of your belief is sure to come to you. Oh, came to believe, a dimmer switch process, not a light switch flick going on an event like he had. No, most of us don't have that. On page 57, there are more promises, just some of which I'll read here. Circumstances made him willing to believe. Oh, step one, I got my head kicked in with addiction. Oh, circumstances, step one, unmanageability, 10 years of sobriety, and I'm living the bedevilments. Circumstances made him willing. God has restored us to our right minds, sanity. We're placed in a spiritual shield that protects us from the obsession. We're placed in a position of neutrality. Addiction is not an issue. Not because I say it so, but because I've been given the gift of grace. Please hear that. I can't earn it. He also says, I can't lose it at the top of 57. Seemingly, he could not drink even if he would. Awkward language from 1939. Essentially, it says, I can't choose to drink. I can't choose to not drink. I've lost the power of choice both ways. That's a challenging concept. That's a challenging statement. That's a challenging promise. Seemingly, I cannot drink even if I wanted to. Some of us go into it more slowly. Some of them have revelation that was sudden. God has come to all who have honestly sought. There's the promise. Here's the condition, though. Honestly sought. The last one. When we drew near to God, God discloses God's self to us. Here's the promise. Here's the promise. Here's the process. But here's the condition. When we drew near. There's a strange, mysterious connection between willingness and grace. I don't know what it is. It's a mystery to me. Which comes first, willingness or grace? Grace or willingness? Chicken or egg or chicken? I don't know, and I've thought a lot about it, but I was given a poem. It didn't answer the question, but it gave me satisfaction. Probably because it was a poem and it was a gift. Hear the poem. I was taken to a place of willingness. Hear the grace of that. I was taken to a place of willingness. But I was willing to be taken. There's my role. There's my contribution. My willingness and then the action that went with it. The man who took me through the work, when I would balk, he would say, because I would say, I'm willing, I just don't have time. He said, her willingness without action is fantasy. Obviously, a different version of faith without works is dead, which is in the scripture that was part of the Oxford group basis for their development of their 6 steps. Willingness without action is fantasy. Transcendent, the circumference. Immanence, the center. Thomas Merton said, God is that mystery which has no circumference and whose center is everywhere. That's grist for the mill of a wonderful meditation. Spirit everywhere, deep down inside us. Step 2 is a decision about my concept. We're in the bondage of self, or we're in the bondage of addiction. The spiritual malady can be dealt with if we drop the bars. That's our job, to drop the bars. I didn't know that. This is from the concepts, freedom under God, to grow in God's image and likeness will ever be the quest of Alcoholics Anonymous. Our freedom to serve is truly the freedom by which we have our being, the freedom in which we have our being. This comes from the 12 concepts. This is step 2. Came to believe in a power greater than ourselves. This is the process leading to a spiritual awakening, a change in the way we think and feel and behave, and it's done to us, not by us. So the final question for you, at least as part of this discussion right now, is what do you need and what do you want in power? What do you need and what do you want? What attributes or qualities do you want God to be and have? It's your decision. The big book has no beliefs. The big book has no theology. The big book has no dogma. The attraction of the 12-step fellowship is its simplicity and its individualization. One of the mystics from the 19th century said, "There is no place that there is not God." Another one from the Middle Ages said, "God is closer to me than I am to myself." A different one said, "God is closer to me than my very breath." Another mystic said, "In between me and God, there is no between." In between me and God, there is no between. See, Bill had a mystical insight on page 53. God is or God isn't. God is everything or there is no God. Read it. I'm paraphrasing the last part, but I think that's what it means. Gandhi himself said, "My concept of God will change as I do." And Jung sent a letter to Bill Wilson in 1961, acknowledging Bill's letter to him. And he said, "Thanks for your letter. I've tracked you guys." He said, "Alcoholics," I'm paraphrasing, "alcoholics are uniquely spiritual people. Addicts are uniquely spiritual people," we would say in this workshop. Addicts are uniquely spiritual people. They have this deep hunger and thirst for the spirit, and they get distracted by spirits. Spirit with a capital S, spirits with a small s, a synonym for alcohol and addiction. We have a deep hunger and thirst. And Pascal, a 19th century philosopher, said it the best. The whole in us is in the shape of God. The whole in us is in the shape of God. Power. A relationship with power. I like and have been using recently the words light and darkness. I'm in a flow. The dimmer switch goes up a notch at a time. It also goes down a notch at a time. But as long as I lean gently into it, keeping through the step work, 10, 11, and 12, pushing that dimmer switch up, it will go up a notch at a time and it won't go backwards. It's spring loaded to go backwards if I don't attend to it on a daily basis. I have a daily reprieve. I hope you are thinking about and writing about what you need and want in attributes and qualities. And your God will change as you do. Keep in mind in the rear view mirror your experience with powerlessness. So maybe your concepts need to include some connotation of power. Keep in mind looking forward to step 3, in which it says we made a decision to turn our will and our life over to the care of God. Perhaps there should be some connotation of a benevolent power. Benevolent meaning good, meaning having my interests. Unconditional, perhaps. I looked up the word altruism in a dictionary in pursuit of a good definition of unconditional love. A word that is so hackneyed, used so often like powerless, it loses its power. And I looked up the word altruism. Doing some benefit for somebody else with no possible benefit for myself. Perhaps that's what it means. This power other than me that has created me in its image and likeness. I have a mind and I have free will, and I can choose. I can choose this concept, and I can choose how to act in relationship to this concept. And my life depends on it. I'm at the fork in the road, Bill said. Am I going to go to the right and the darkness continues? Or am I going to choose the path less traveled toward the light? Let's bring it to a conclusion now. I'm going to go off of the PowerPoint and open it up for participation.
The question number 1 was, what do I believe? And the question number 2 was, how do I behave in light of what I say I believe? So, okay, so my question, I feel like number 2 is a trick question.
It is.
Okay.
But what do you think the trick is?
I know the trick is not perfection, and I'm leaning that direction of like, what are you kidding? I know it's not, but it appears like it might be. And that's where I'm just, I don't want to be harsh in how I behave. I mean, I see how I behave. I'm not perfect. I'm human.
Well, wait. Let's not cut you so much slack. Yeah, you're a human. Yeah, you're not perfect. So where do you see that you're not living up to some standard that you're trying to wiggle out of?
Well, my addiction right now that I'm looking at, Herb, is around food.
So that's a tough one. That's a tough one. Yep. Okay,
I'm looking at that relationship.
I'm so glad that you were that honest and vulnerable, because I have to agree that that is the toughest one to navigate. Mm-hmm.
I'm sober 30 years.
Yep.
And part of me realizes the reason I chose to get sober first was, I'll be honest with you, it was easier knowing I had the gold coin in my pocket of a food addiction. You know, I had my own little heroin. It was in my back pocket, and it was very accepted. So
let's just challenge though, because there's a lot of misinformation in the rooms of the food addicts.
Yes, there are.
Yes, there is. And, you know, it's about, well, you can't work the steps until you get abstinent. Hello? What part of powerless don't you understand? And so maybe it's like, okay, I've got a food addiction and I'm hopeless, and I'm going to show up every day, and I'm going to do my prayer and meditation, and I'm going to help other people, and I'm going to be transparent with my sponsor about all my thoughts and feelings and behavior, and I'm going to do the best I can, even knowing that I'm not going to do the best I can, and being humbled by that and transparent anyway. How does that work?
That's the way I live.
Well, then it doesn't get any better than that. And so you're obviously living in acceptance that you're a hopeless food addict, and you can't do anything about it except the best you can. And the magic isn't happening, and it's not your fault.
Well, the magic does happen one day at a time.
Oh.
And it happens every single time my thoughts shift and my behavior changes and my trust broadens. That's what happens. And that happens at every meal, to be really honest with you.
No. From my standpoint, this is a really healthy discussion, and I'm so glad we had it at the beginning, because it really kind of talks about the whole parameter of addiction, doesn't it?
Yeah. So what's the trick to how do I behave in light of what I say I believe?
Well, maybe there is no trick here. I meant that's a trick question in the sense that it startled me because I discovered I wasn't praying on a daily basis and I was self-reliant, even though I deluded myself that I was a spiritually awake person. When I asked myself, do I rely on God? I said, no. I mean, my feet behave as if I'm in charge and God's like on the bench watching. Not a partner walking hand in hand with me. So that's what I meant by a trick, meaning like it was the magic key that opened the curtain that said, Herb, you actually don't believe you're that powerless because you're relying on yourself rather than relying on a power other than yourself.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
No, thanks. Very healthy discussion. I really appreciate it. Thank you.
So why am I here? For relief? Relief from pain, from grief. I'm caring for special needs kids. There's always turmoil, and as they described to me, and today, as I heard you again talking about the waves are continuously coming for me, and it's dealing with the waves in a sane way rather than going to self-pity. And there's a grief. There was a family member who committed suicide. He was 29, got a gun. I told the parents, you got to get rid of the gun from the house and so forth. So, I have my own judgment on this. It did happen. And it's fresh. It relates to my own family. That would not happen there. Fortunately, it was not successful. And then what do I expect? I expect why I was here is to get closer continuation connection with God. I lose it. I do meditate. I'm in 12 steps. I'm an overeater, and I've been maintaining my abstinence with food, but not with my emotions and I guess people. And I think now as I went through it, may be self-pity that I dwell, and that's my MO, is perhaps to get people's compassion because I have so many problems.
Well, let's pause for just a minute. And you said
Okay.
you lose your connection. What does that mean for you?
Then I become a robot.
Yep. That's human nature. Yep, that's human nature. So do you do wait.
Okay.
Do you do step 11 meditation?
Yes, I do. I do it in the morning.
And what do you do?
I read from daily reading for the Mass.
All
okay.
Right.
I read on that. I meditate for 20 minutes.
What do you mean by meditate?
Okay, I pick a word that stands for me and I bring it to God and I rest. And I'm being there. I'm totally relaxed and not preoccupied. I got my eyes closed.
All right. And why do you do it? Why do you commit that 20 minutes?
To connect with God.
Okay, and so that's step 11. What you're just describing is, listen to the words. To improve my conscious contact. So is that what's happening for you?
Yeah, it does. I have it in the morning. Well, I lose it. Right. I lose it by one.
You get distracted, but do you periodically throughout the day find yourself remembering and aware?
No, I forget.
Okay, all right. So, all right. I'm not sure what to say. My experience is that I had a breakthrough when I first did the steps in 1988 at 4 years of sobriety with step 11. And I began to have a practice on a daily basis. And over time, I expanded the practice, but I find myself more and more often during the day becoming aware, cyclically going into awareness and coming out of it, into it and out of it throughout the day, without planned, without promotion, without scheduling it. And so if you're not experiencing that, I'm not sure what to say to you. except maybe you want to re-examine what you're doing in that 20 minutes and have it perhaps maybe challenge the structure and or the intention and or the content of what you're doing. Because it would be my experience that it will have vibrations throughout the day. As you practice it, you become more attuned and aware. Bill says in Appendix 2, you might read that, awareness of the presence of God is the essence of a spiritual experience. When's the last time you did the 12 steps?
A couple months ago.
Okay, you mean from 1 to 12?
Yeah.
Okay, and what was your experience with doing it?
My thinking, it was great. I actually went deeper.
Okay.
I've done steps many times. Okay, I'm talking 4, 5, 7 times. Okay.
Yeah.
It's peeling the onions for me. It's I went deeper that it's my thinking that changes, and I fall into my childhood patterns and my expectations.
All right. Well, I don't like self-promotion, and I'm very reluctant to do it, but I would gently suggest that you get my third book, which is Practicing the Here and Now. It was published by Hazelton in 2017, and it describes the variety of meditation practices, especially step 11 from the big book and centering prayer from Father Thomas Keating, which are the combinations of my meditation practice. And that might be helpful to you.
Okay. Is the centering prayer similar that you practice on Wednesday?
It's identical.
Yeah. Okay. There's something that as you spoke about the awareness of God at the moment, something just happened 2 days ago, Thursday. I was leading a meeting and I look through the window and I see birds on a nest, making a nest again, which they did last year. And I literally, I just realized how powerful is God.
All right.
So, that really reminds me, connect us to, your point of my awareness. Where is my awareness going? And I don't have the visual that you just had about the decision, the faith, and it all is of action. So, I'm looking forward to seeing that, because that also triggered that, what is it that I'm losing when I get so tied up with every little things that I have to do?
It sounds like you've got a very, very vibrant spiritual life, and it might just need a little fine tuning if in fact you have any areas that you feel need improvement, but I wouldn't be overly concerned about it, but continue growing as you're asking questions and attending this. And if you attend centering prayer the twice a month that we meet, that might be very helpful to you also. All right.
I just had a question of, when I work with sponsees, I have two actually right now that are both, don't believe in a higher power.
They don't have, read chapter 2 from the 12 and 12. It said maybe they need to choose the group as a higher power, which I believe is a brilliant insight. The group has something that the individual doesn't have. That's why the individual is coming to the group. Now it's a little more challenging where we don't have physical meetings, but I'm assuming they're connecting on Zoom. But anyway, go ahead with your comments.
Yeah, well, that was my question is basically that's what I usually recommend, that they believe in the group of drunks.
Yeah.
But my question to you was, is there anything I can do or say that could help that person who doesn't believe?
Well, first, they've come to you because they have an addiction.
Sorry, yes, they're in we're in Alcoholics Anonymous, yes.
Okay, all right. And so have you taken them through step 1?
Yeah, I've taken both of them through the steps.
Well, wait a minute. How did you get through step 2 and still ask this question?
Exactly.
Well, all right. Well, how did you? How did you take them through step 2?
We read the We Agnostics, and then I I asked them to write down a concept of a higher power.
Yeah, a power other than themselves. You could drop the word higher. It's a power other than themselves. All right. Did they do that?
They did that. It was beautiful, concept. And then I asked them to pray and meditate on a daily basis.
Yes. Do they do that?
They do that.
Okay. What do they pray to and meditate on?
Well, that's the thing. There's still that I don't, every couple of months I don't believe in a deity or whatever they say.
All right. Then you just say, gosh, I really understand that. What are you doing?
Yeah.
What are you doing? Because that's the only relevant question. What you believe, what you think, what you feel, interesting but irrelevant. It's what you're doing. Are you praying? Are you meditating? Are you doing a 10th step on a daily basis, removing the disturbances in you? Are you helping other people? Are you operating your life on principles? And it's going to be interesting to see what happens, because I'm assuming they're going to be all saying yes, and it's great. Doesn't matter what you think, doesn't matter what you believe, doesn't matter what you know, doesn't matter what you feel. It does matter what you do. So
Okay.
continue what you're doing and be patient. Are both of them in abstinence?
Yeah, they're both in abstinence, and one's been sober 5 years and one's been sober 3 years.
All right. So how do they explain that?
I don't know how they
Have you asked them that?
I guess I could ask them that question.
Ask them that. I mean, they may have an answer. Oh, well, because I decided not to. Okay. Had you ever decided before and been successful?
Yeah.
It doesn't matter. The truth is they're successful by abstinence definition, and therefore continue doing what you're doing and detach from thinking and feeling about it.
I think it always just blows me away how they every month or so they come back to that I don't believe.
Oh, that's okay. They're saying, okay, I understand. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Just
I use the term mystery.
Yeah.
Because I really don't know what it is. I just believe that it is. And I now act authentically and integrity with that. And which is what they're doing.
Yeah.
Yeah. So they're getting the results. Abstinence.
Absolutely. Okay, thank you.
Yeah. For people who are in a food program who are hearing me, I don't mean it's black and white, because as I've mentioned to the first person that we talked to, the food program is very unique. Food addiction is I don't understand it. I'm not in it. I have a lot of exposure to it, but it is the most difficult one. So listen to what I say, but wear it very loosely if you're in a food program, please.
My understanding is that different sponsors do different 4 steps different ways.
Have you done the 4th step out of the big book?
Yes, I have. And I've done it with a few different women who have different stuff.
Let me ask some questions. In the step 4 inventory, did you do a 4-column resentment inventory?
Did I do it? Yes, exactly.
All right. What was your experience with that?
The 4 columns, like, fantastic.
Well,
I mean, I've been in therapy for a long time.
No. What was your experience, meaning your awarenesses in doing column 3 and column 4?
Well, it showed my part in things, and it showed the role that I play in my own suffering.
All right. My experience with the 3rd column was broader than the instructions in the big book, because somebody had a much deeper experience, and I saw the delusions of my beliefs. My experience with the 4th column is I dropped the language I have a part in my resentment, because I have 100%. I don't have a part. I have 100%. So I saw the corruption of my motives in it. and it was life-changing. I'm not sure that everybody has that kind of experience, but did you do a fear inventory?
Yes, I did. And I saw the craziness of my,
All right. Did you do a sex inventory?
yes, a thorough one. I also work a program around sex.
All right. Did you create a sex ideal?
Yes.
Oh, wonderful. Okay, so it sounds like you've really done some good work. Do you have a daily meditation practice?
Yes, I do. I do 24 minutes every night.
All right, all right. And when you meditate, what do you do?
I sit in vertical spine, and I sit facing a Buddha because that's it's just
All right.
a statue I have.
Yeah.
And I close my eyes and I set my alarm for 24 minutes, spend about 10 minutes praying, and then the rest meditating, or I'll go in and out of it. And I just listen.
Wait, I understand. When you say you spend some time in meditation, what is it that you're doing?
Listening.
For what?
Direction from God,
All right.
messages.
All right. All right. All right. Yep. All right. You said you have problems with character defects. I'm not gonna ask any question. I'm gonna share my experience. When I came to my primary character defect, I was very clear that I was powerless over it. But the man who took me through the work said, but you're not helpless. You're powerless over the defect, but you're responsible for the behavior. So pray every day for the removal of the defect, but call me every day with regard to how you're behaving. And it was a great insight because I'm powerless over the inclination, but I'm responsible for the manifestation in my behavior. I pray for the removal, but I talk about my behavior. The behavior changed in 48 hours. It's never returned. The inclination went away after 2 years.
Okay.
Hear the difference?
Yes, I do now. Thank you.
Yeah. Well, it sounds like you got a very vibrant program, and so maybe that will help.
My one question to you is, are you satisfied?
With what?
You talked a lot about dissatisfaction, and I just want to know, are you satisfied?
Yeah, and the answer is yes, unequivocally. The word I adopted right around 1990, 1992, in that area, 1996 actually, was that my life flourishes. And it continues to expand on a daily basis. It's the only word I can use to describe. I'm very content. Now, do I experience speed bumps? Life? Yes, absolutely. My wife died of 52 years, 3 years ago. And of course, that's a major speed bump. All right. I thought I would handle it very well, and I did. I thought I would handle it sooner than later, and I didn't. I thought I would be processing the grief over a 6-month period because I'm a vital spiritual guy, right? No, it was 2 years. All right. And I became aware after about 2 years that I entered a new level of acceptance and connection and et cetera. So I don't know. Does that answer your question?
I was just curious. I mean,
Oh.
I'm not. So it's interesting to me to hear you talk about that it's actual possibility to be satisfied. So that's all. Thank you.
Doctors, well, let's stay with it for just a minute, because this is the root of the thing. This is the root of it here. That's why I talk so much about unmanageability. It's the best kept secret in the rooms of 12-step. Unmanageability is what you're describing, and Dr. Silkworth calls it restless, irritable, and discontent, because that's what our addiction treated. It reduced by narcotizing our attention. And when we get rid of the addiction, unless we have a vibrant relationship with a power other than ourselves, we will be restless, irritable, and discontent. So that's the question I was asking there. Are you content? Do you have a sense of well-being in the discussion that I put up in PowerPoint? Because if you don't have that, then there's something amiss. And my suggestion, well, when's the last time you did steps 1 through 9 out of the big book?
I'm just starting step 6 right now.
Oh, so you're in it.
Yeah.
Oh, well, no wonder you're.
Okay. My character defects are in my face.
Oh, right, well, yeah, boom. All right, well, there's the answer. You're swimming in the sewer.
Yeah, it's good. It's a good thing.
I
just and I you know, maybe I'll ask Dr. Allenberger this, but I'm just curious about what the role does depression, that negative thinking, you know, where does that come in, you know?
Yeah.
Because you said last week you talked about God as biology, and I was like, bang, that was exactly what I was talking about. Because if I don't take my medicines, but when I'm balanced in my medicines, like it's all flow and happiness, and I'm trying to be of service and all that stuff.
Oh, so there you go. All right. Yeah. Well, you're wonderfully conscious about what's going on. So stay accountable. Stay accountable. and if you have professional questions, ask professionals. Absolutely.
Yeah. Okay.
All
Thanks.
Right. Thanks very much.
So as a child, I was hurt. My parents were alcoholic, and I would pray for God to help me.
Yeah.
To stop their alcoholism, to get me out of those bad situations.
Yeah.
And nothing happened, Herb. And I know
God is not Santa Claus.
Okay. It just, for me to make like my beliefs about God, I want to believe that
you're in a 12-step program.
Yeah.
Have you done the steps?
No, I'm just starting.
Good, excellent, good questions then.
Okay.
Yeah. No, wonderful questions. It's great that you're asking. It's great that you're showing up. You're in the beginning of a journey that's going to open up the world for you. The curtain's going to part and the light's going to shine and the blue sky's going to appear, but not by tomorrow.
Okay.
Yeah, you have a sponsor?
Yes. Yes, I do.
And is your sponsor giving you directions as to working steps?
So I started what's called an AWOL
with
our food program.
Yep.
And so we're just beginning.
Good, great. AWOLs are great. They go, but here's the deal. They go that deep.
Yeah.
All right. They go that deep. It's good. It's a great start. Please do it. And then go that deep.
In terms of my concept of God, is that I just leave that and wait till I go through this?
Ask your sponsor, but I would suggest that you call her today and talk about that question, and that I hope she would give you the answer that choose a concept for yourself at this point, just on the basis of choosing it, whatever it is you want or need, and then begin just a small prayer practice, maybe with the set aside prayer.
Why?
And it doesn't matter what you think and know, do it anyway.
Okay. So make that concept based on what I want God to be for me. Yes. I feel like I need evidence.
The what?
I feel like I need evidence all the time.
Well, get over it.
Okay.
Well, I can say it this quickly because you have such a great sense of humor.
Yes.
Yeah. I don't have to dance around with you. I can be direct.
Thank you.
Yeah. All right.
Okay. Take care.
You're right at the beginning. And what I say to beginners, and I call anybody in the first 5 years a beginner. And I tell them the best thing that you can do is to breathe.
Okay.
Breathe in and out, and then talk to your sponsor and take direction.
Sounds good.
It is good.
Okay.
Thanks very much. Wonderful.
Thank you for your transparency about your having more than one spiritual awakening. At age 21, I had a spiritual salvation experience with Jesus that saved my life. And then When I was 35, I heard the still small voice say, "You find more comfort in ice cream than you do in me." And that startled me because I was like, what?
Yeah, right.
So, I had a faith practice, and then all of a sudden I was confronted by this, food addiction. So then I found FA. I lost about 100 pounds in 2006.
Wow.
And for 7 years, I did service, worked my steps, and then basically in my story is I was sexually assaulted, and I felt like my concept of God really crashed, and I gained 120 pounds.
Wow.
And been struggling with relapse since then.
Yeah.
And I can't get abstinent again for more than. So my question for you is, did you set aside your Judeo-Christian concept of God because I feel like I'm being punished, or I did something wrong, or why didn't God protect me?
Yeah. No, it's a very human reaction. It's a very normal reaction. There's nothing wrong with your reaction. It's just not helpful. And I was confronted by somebody in one of my workshops who said the following, and they weren't confronting me. It was what they said that was confronting, because I'd never heard it before. And I want you to listen to it. I just want you to be open, everybody on the call, and just listen to it. God protects us from nothing and supports us in everything. It's very powerful. It's very provocative. You see, God doesn't protect us. We're human beings living in a human world, and it's dangerous. But God does support us in everything. What does that mean? As Bill said on page 14, in contemplation of him who provides, who watches over us, or something like that. And that's that idea of that unconditional loving safety net in terms of support of living, like water supports that fish in the ocean. But if there's a shark in the ocean, the fish is going to be eaten. And that's just what is. So if a deer is getting a drink of water from a lake, that's a really good thing for the deer. But when the mountain lion comes up behind the deer and eats the deer, it's a very bad thing for the deer, but it's a very good thing for the mountain lion. And life is in session, and you had a very unfortunate situation. And it has nothing to do with God. It has everything to do with an unfortunate situation. Yeah. And so, but then you have the responsibility now to deal with it, don't you? And it may be that there's some professional help necessary as a resource to deal with the trauma of this abuse, because it's real. It happened. All right. And it affects you psychologically. It affects you biologically. And, as I say, you're dealing with an addiction that's very pernicious. It's very subversive. It's very difficult to deal with, because you do have to eat 1, 2, 3, 4 times a day. And each person's biochemistry is different. And food's chemistry reacts differently to different people. Some people are allergic to dairy products, some people to nuts, some people to fruit, some people to, most people who have an addiction problem are allergic to flour and sugar. That's pretty generic, but there's so many variations on a theme, and your individual situation needs to be evaluated by you and a compassionate sponsor, an informed sponsor, and not all of them are compassionate or informed, as you know. Yeah. Are you familiar with, I mentioned this to another person, the A Vision for You program?
My sponsor actually is very compassionate, and she is familiar with that. So I'm not deeply, but I definitely have a curiosity about it and an intention to explore it.
Yeah, you don't have to belong to OA to be part of a Vision for You group, but there are people who have an eating disorder who are connected to the Big Book and the STEP process and have tremendous success with it.
Okay.
All right. Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Thanks for coming on the call, staying on the call, and having the vulnerability to ask the question publicly like that. I hope it was helpful.
Yes, sir.
All right. Thank you.
Is there a chance to be more specific with this concept? I'm balancing, you know, okay, it's this, but it's not that.
Sure. Yeah. Well, number one, it's a decision. It's a clear decision. My first decision in this process was that God was my creator and that I'm the created, and that's the relationship. Then I used the term parent, father, and then I was the beloved son. Then the next time, 3 years later, was teacher, mentor, and I was the pupil. So as I had different needs, I created different concepts, and I used that in my behavior. So the key is be specific in your concept, at least in the beginning, and then behave as if it's true. The key is not about here and not about here. Those are just games. The key is in your feet. How do your feet move? Are you moving toward the light or are you moving toward the darkness? Are you operating on principles or are you operating on immediate gratification?
Okay, well, to be honest, there is light. There is a light. Okay, in my days, but it's so unfamiliar to me, all this experience, and I have doubts because my sponsor said that the God path is a personal path for everyone. My great reality, it's my Thanos reality, and no one's else reality, and this is I have fear sometimes, and it's an unfamiliar situation that, okay, this is my own reality, so I'm different from the others. I heard that and these other sharings, and oh, okay, I'm someone else.
Yeah, it's very personal, and sometimes you will have doubt, and sometimes you will have fear. And in those times, you talk about it to your sponsor, and you take the direction and you take the actions, no matter your doubt or your fear.
Okay.
You see, we do not let this rule us. We do not let this rule us. We're responsible to think. We're responsible to be aware of our feelings, but we manage them. We get information from our sponsor, step guide, therapist, friend, whoever is trustworthy and credible based on their experience. And then we take the actions based on the suggestions, not on our head and not on our feelings.
Okay.
And it change, and our head and feelings change over time.
Mm-hmm. Okay. And one more. Is it helpful to write down these parts of concept? I mean, there is no one concept, that one sentence. It's parts of a concept.
That's sometimes why I use the term mystery, because that encompasses everything. I don't know. I don't need to know. I don't need to know what it is. I made a decision that it is. And it's a power that's very mysterious. And I'm going to act as if it's totally supporting me. I have no feeling and I have no certitude, but I'm going to act as if it's true. Act as if is the formula, the key to step 2.
Okay. Do you think that there is a balance? I don't know. I think sometimes I'm trying to control this concept. And
Yeah,
do you
good,
think
good
that
luck.
what?
Good luck.
Thank you. I would like to ask, it's more about experience, this concept, this mystery, than to understand or express it.
Sure, yeah, but the only way you'll really know, and maybe not even then, is 3 months down the road, look back over your shoulder and see what your life has evolved like. What does it manifest? As my teacher Richard Rohr says, faith is the acceptance of that for which there is no evidence. But once I accept it, the evidence appears. Have you done the steps out of the big book?
I'm on the 5th step now.
5th step, great, good.
Yeah.
Just gently stay pressed up against it. Keep asking your questions, keep looking back over your shoulder, but keep moving forward, pressed up against, moving that dimmer switch up a notch at a time, and the lights get brighter and the lights get brighter. And by the end of the 9th step, it'll be interesting to see what your consciousness is about this very question. All right?
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Wonderful questions. Good.
I'm also a food addict.
Yeah.
And I've been in the program for 2.5 years.
Yeah.
And I can't be abstinent longer than like 30 days.
Yeah.
And I've lost all my weight, but I'm still crazy. And
Yeah.
and I used to tell my sponsor, I was very transparent. And after so many times of breaking, she dropped me. And so now I don't want to tell my sponsor because I don't want to be dropped. I've been in like 55 AWOLs. I can never work the steps because I keep breaking.
Yeah, that's the problem with the one of the food problems anyway. They want you to be absent in order to work the steps, and that's putting the cart before the horse.
So I don't know what to do because I know I'm powerless.
Yeah.
And also the question you asked, I believe that God can make personality changes and do miracles. I feel like because it's been 2.5 years, I just feel like he doesn't want to do it for me.
Yep, I understand.
So
Yep.
I don't know how to start believing that my higher power will, because it isn't happening.
Yeah. Yeah. You have to find somebody who will help you work the steps outside of the AWOL.
Okay.
Yeah. The steps promise, but in step 10, after you finish step 9, read pages 84 and 85. It's after you finish step 9 in the big book that it promises to place you in a position of neutrality. Hear the gift of that. To be placed in a position of neutrality. But not a moment sooner. I take people through the steps even when they're drinking. Now, I won't take them that particular day. I won't talk to them if, in fact, they've been drinking that day.
Okay.
But when they have a day of not drinking, then I will help them with the step. Because I want them to be clear, from being drunk.
Right.
It took one of the guys that I worked with 10 years. And it was after he finished his 5th step that he got free. But it took him 10 years to do up through the 5th step. I'm not saying take your time at all.
Right.
How soon do you want to be free, and how free do you want to be? So if in fact if you're not able to trust your sponsor, get a different sponsor that you trust, and then just trust. And if in fact the one fellowship isn't serving your needs, look, be open-minded. Your life is on the line. Your happiness is on the line. The quality of your life is on the line. This is not a game.
Yeah, I know it just it feels like this program is the answer, but I'm just not. I don't see how. I think anything else is going to be worse, I guess.
I don't know. Yep.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. You're at a difficult spot. I don't want to be glib with an easy answer, because there isn't an easy answer. But the only answer I know, and I know it experientially, and I know it 100%. I've been exposed to now thousands of people internationally because of the workshops over 25 years. Every person, no matter the addiction, who has finished the steps has been given freedom from their addiction. Everyone, 100%. At least that I'm aware of. All right.
Yeah, sorry, thank you. I have one more question connected to what you just said. I think in our program, or what I've only 2.5 years in, so maybe I'm not understanding clearly, but they say the reason you have to go back and start again at step 1 is because you aren't recognizing that you're powerless, because you took your will back and eat.
That's ignorant. So I'm sorry. I'll be that blunt. That's just ignorant. I never take people back to the first step, because it's only after the 9th step that they get free. Somebody relapses in the 4th step. We pause for a minute. We talk about it. We renew our commitment to God in the process, and then they continue with the 4th step. I never go back to the 1st step.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah, you bet. Thank you. Well, wonderful, robust conversation. I love your vulnerability and your courage. Thank you so much. I think I can get the prayer of St. Francis up here, and I'm going to ask you to join me if it's still available to me. Let's see if we can do this. There we go. Please join me in the prayer of transformation. This is the prayer of healing. This is the prayer of turning. Listen to the promise. Listen to the process. Listen to the turning. And join me in unison, please. Lord, make me a channel of your peace, that where there is hatred, I may bring love, that where there is wrong, I may bring the spirit of forgiveness, that where there is discord, I may bring harmony, that where there is error, I may bring truth, that where there is doubt, I may bring faith, that where there is despair, I may bring hope, that where there are shadows, I may bring light, that where there is sadness, I may bring joy. Lord, grant that I may seek rather to comfort than to be comforted, to understand than to be understood, to love than to be loved. For it is by self-forgetting that one finds, it is by forgiving that one is forgiven. It is by dying that one awakens to eternal life. Amen. Eckhart Tolle said in The Power of Now, the secret to life is to die before you die and realize there is no death. Bill said it essentially in the same words in 1939 in the Big Book. Simple, but not easy. A price has to be paid. It means the destruction of self-centeredness. The death of the false self would be my interpretation. But we must turn in all things to the Father of light, who presides over us all. That's his metaphor. That's his poetry for what we're talking about here. Believing in a power other than ourselves. Thank you so much for being with me today.